Hi, my name is Shanda Rule. I'm a singer, storyteller, joy spreader, and host of the Courageous Voice podcast. The Courageous Voice podcast gathers and shares stories from artistic folks around the world and their journeys through fear, courageousness, and creativity. Join us and get inspired with me as we chat about learning to befriend and walk with and past our fears to share our voices courageously with the world. Hello and welcome back to the Courageous Voice podcast. My name is Shanda Rule, your host, and I'm super excited to be here. And I am excited to welcome today's guest, Charles Vincent Burwell. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you.
Oh my goodness. It's so good to see you too. Y'all, if you don't know Vince, I call him Vince. Listen, can I call you Vince on the podcast or should I call you Charles?
No, Vince is great. People who know me call me Vince. So yes.
I'm going to call you Vince. Vince and I go way back. We are buddies. Let me tell you a bit about Charles. He's a composer. He's a writer. He is a producer. He is an educator, a vocalist, performer, dancer, so many things, y'all. He's a world traveler, multi-instrumentalist. See, all these things were not in your bio, but I know these things about you. What else? He's currently a professor of theater at the Boston Conservatory and is also a partner with Clever Agency, which we're going to get into later, and the Burwell and Sasser. Did I get most of the things right?
Yeah, I think so. When you put it all together, it sounds slightly impressive.
Slightly impressive. Oh, but the most impressive is Skateboarder. Over 40-year-old skateboarder. This is the most impressive of them all.
Yeah, there might be an expiration date on that.
All right, but welcome.
Thank you.
So how's it going there in New York?
All in all, things are good. I have a couple of shows opening this year, which are exciting, James and I, and continuing my work at the Boston Conservatory at Berkeley. And yeah, just pretty active, pretty busy. And in our business, busy is good.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Well, listen, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to dive. I was on your website and you've got a lot of really cool things happening. Actually, over the past, I don't know how many years. I think you started this last year where you were putting different quotes on your Instagram page. Yeah. And one of them I saw on your website and it says, artistry can always be repurposed. So I would love to start there. What is this? Tell me more about this repurposing of art. I have thoughts on it, but I would love to hear what prompted you to write that.
Well, so much of it, thank you. So much of it comes from my students and thinking about how they're going to earn a living when they graduate, because they want to be actors and they want to be artists. And we all know about the New York struggle and you know, the high risk, high reward nature of the craft and of the field. And I tell them that, okay, well, let's think bigger than what you're here at the conservatory to do, because your artistry can always be repurposed. And because now we're in the age of the creative, or whatever the creative is, which is a loose definition for a number of things, but because the business environment and media are continuously looking ways to harness artistry, because there is no form or fashion or rhyme or reason to how you maintain a career in the arts. Everybody's building the plane while they're flying it. And so for those individuals who are artists or who have an arts-minded mentality, there are a lot more opportunities now. And I try to tell them that, okay, you have a way of seeing things here. That doesn't mean that this is all that you can do. Okay. Your contributions to the field don't stop at the stage. And that's part of the inspiration for the Clever Agency, which we'll get into shortly, I'm sure. The idea that, okay, because we're artists, that doesn't mean that all we can do is sing, dance, perform, draw, or paint, or whatever. It means it's a mindset. It means that our minds and our mind power and our essence can be formed. We're formless like water. You know, we can kind of take what we have and place it in any place, and we'll still, you know, increase our value to wherever we are. And
Yes.
once we have that in our mind as artists, we realize that we have a lot more options and a lot more opportunities than we've been led to believe.
Hmm. You know, I'm smiling because this is like the beautiful thing of knowing people for years. Because when we met, I believe you were drumming at a dance
Mhm.
studio and you were also singing, you were also songwriting. And the interesting thing about you is that you always, since I've known you, you've always been someone who's like, yep, I do this. Yep, I play piano. Yep, I can play trumpet. I'm doing this. And at the core, though, always educating. And I love to tell people the story of we used to work together at this dance studio, but I auditioned for a show you were doing. And so, of course, you know, I'm all nervous. I'm going to the audition, right? And you proceeded to give me a voice lesson in the middle of
Yeah.
my audition, which was slightly mortifying, but I learned so much, but it also is kind of a testament to just your spirit. It's always been there. So tell me how this developed. I don't know if this was something that was placed in you from your family. Yeah, how did this start? Because there takes a certain mindset to be like, okay, yes, I can do this and I can try this and that's okay and I can try this and all these
Mhm.
things.
Yes, definitely. I remember that, and I'm kind of mortified thinking about that. I was like, wow, yeah, I did do that.
Yeah,
I'm
you did
sorry.
it. Oh, I learned a lot.
But I was raised, my father was one of those teaching parents. He always said, son, you're going to need to know this. You're going to
Hmm.
need to, this is how you do this. This is how you do this. My mom by trade was a teacher. She taught French. And she was my French teacher for 2 years in high school, which was in and of itself a learning experience on multiple levels. But so I always had that. And up until that point, I had been in the education sector. And then when I came out, that's what I was qualified to do.
Hmm.
And so I think that it's always been there because I'm kind of an information junkie. And it's interesting. I was always that why child, you know, go clean up your room. Why? And then my mom says, I'm not going to say what she said, but I always had questions and I always had this idea of wanting to know. And when I find out, I'm excited by learning what I learn. And in my mind, everybody should be. And I
Hmm.
think that everybody, at that point, my thinking was that, well, everybody is excited to learn new things. And so if I have something to share, I share. And sometimes, I've overshared. But at moments where sharing was not the point of the exercise, but it's always been there. And so on top of that, because my undergraduate degree was in music education, I was trained to teach.
Hmm.
So it's kind of always been there. Then move forward, I moved to New York with a U-Haul and a dream. For those of you who don't know what a U-Haul is, a U-Haul is where you rent a truck and move all your stuff into the truck and you move yourself without movers. And none of your friends are around to help you unless they're really good friends. But when I moved to New York, one of the few jobs I could have waited tables, which many people do, which I could have catered, which many people do. Most artists do at some point, performers do at some point in New York, or you can teach. And so for all of these years that I've been in this field as the performer, as a, going around touring, whatever, I've always still also augmented that by teaching. And so at this point in my career, I've taught on every level of
Hmm.
education, from kindergarten to, graduate study. And as a teacher, I'm always learning.
Hmm.
And I tell my students that teaching keeps me young because I'm always learning and then, learning how to dress so I don't look as old as I am. But the education process is what's enabled me to continue to be able to do this and do that and be a multi-hyphenate. And my world was that I was a multi-hyphenate before it was kind of a cool thing.
Hmm.
Now it's the thing, oh, I do this and then I model and then I do that and then I'm a stylist and I sing a little bit, I act a little bit, and there's a kind of a cliche to it at this point. But I've made a career off of doing multiple things, and in order to do that, I had to have a thirst for learning.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I want to go deeper into this because I remember stories that you used to tell me about when you were in school, about people standing outside of the classroom and being like, oh, he can't do this. And the reason why I think this is important, especially for the people that are listening, is one of the reasons I created the podcast was because I really wanted to talk about this journey of pushing forward, because so many of my young students they just feel like, okay, I've decided to be an artist and every step is going to take me higher and it's going to be cake and flowers and glitter, right? And so I really want to talk about like these moments of, oh my God, like what is happening? Yet this is my dream, yet I'm going to keep going forward, because this, I mean, for me, this is a definition of courage. And so I'm thinking of, this kind of being like an adult foundation. You're in college, you're pursuing this dream and you're getting this pushback. And then going forward, you're doing all of these things at a time, back in the day, it was like you do this one thing and you do it like exceptionally. You're not supposed to be doing all these things, but you continue. So I would really like you to talk about that, because I also remember like you stepping into like the musical theater writing and stuff. And it was such a beautiful moment of all these talents coming together. But would you mind just talking about just your process and putting one foot in front of the other? Like what kept you going? What sorts of practices kept you going, or community, that sort of thing?
Certainly. I tell people that I was never the best person at anything in the room, even if it was a small room, but I could do a lot of things pretty well. And I've had a career and maintained a career in that. And yeah, going back to that time when we're younger and impressionable. And I remember being in my voice lessons, my freshman, sophomore year in undergrad, and hearing students snickering and laughing outside the door because my voice cracked or because of whatever. And yes, that's humbling. There's a certain level of embarrassment and a certain level of insecurity that comes with that. But there's one of two ways you can deal with it. You can let it take you down, or you can use it to build you up. And everything that doesn't tear you down makes you stronger.
Mhm.
And so if I was going to experience that anyway, then what did I have to lose, really? And so I pushed the envelope. And then I had very real conversations with myself. Okay, am I going to be able to get this solo above this person who is naturally gifted? And I remember a good friend of mine at the time in school, and we both were tenors, and I would go home, I want the solo, I want the part, and I would go and study and learn and practice and go to a practice room and stay up late at night and learn the part. And he would come in, wouldn't necessarily know the music and still get the part. And then I would have to help him learn his music. And we were good friends. I mean, and he understood very well. He's like, look, I know it's not fair. It's just, and we respected the positions that we were in. And over time, I worked on my craft, and then I became the person because I was dependable, or my voice had matured to the point where I could do that. And that just came through work. And at that point, I got bored.
Okay.
And so I found another thing to do or learn. And I found my interest in, okay, well, there's this producing class. And so I went there, understanding commercial music and figuring things out. And I realized that I didn't necessarily have to be great as long as my mind was being stimulated, continuously being stimulated. It's complacency that slows down the process. And a lot of times complacency comes from being bored or things being too predictable. Now let's fast forward to after when I moved to New York. I remember I got a job drumming for a dance studio. It's an interesting, quick story, quick aside. I got a job working at the Alvin Ailey Dance Center because I was recommended by the late Kwame Ross, a good friend who is one of the ancestors now, but he had recommended me to somebody who was over arts and education to be at Ailey, to be an accompanist. And I showed up to the job. I didn't have a drum. I didn't know that we were supposed to have a drum. I didn't know how to play a drum. So I needed to eat. So I got a friend of mine to help me pick out a drum, like a hand drum or a djembe. And it helps that I was surrounded by master drummers. And I taught myself just playing the one so that they could stay on beat until I could play the one and.
Okay.
And I taught myself, and I kept pushing myself just so that I could make enough money to actually eat. And you'd be surprised at what you can pick up when you're hungry. And so next thing you know, I became good. And so there's the community that knew me as a drummer when I went to school for voice. and you just keep pushing and you keep learning and you keep studying and putting yourself in a position to learn. And before long, I had this collection of unique skills and talents that allowed me to be employed or employable. So I often told people that when they were looking for the best person for the job, I wouldn't be the first name on the list. When it became a situation where they needed the best person that they could get in a few things, well, I can do this, I can do that, and I can do this. And you only had to pay one person. And that allowed me to be able to stay in New York during those lean years, during those post 9/11 years, during the bad economy years. Actually, during the bad economy years, I hid out in grad school. And in grad school, I picked up the craft of musical theater writing. And so that created another career avenue. And that's the one that I've taken over the past few years that I'm beginning to experience a moderate level of success in. So it's mind over matter, and looking at a closed door as an open door someplace else.
No, this is interesting because you were mentioning talent when you were going back and you were talking about this friend of yours who was getting all the parts. And I think it's very interesting because it's a word that comes up a lot, obviously, especially when you're teaching kids in the art school. But I feel like the concept of it is not broad enough, because a lot of the things that you mentioned are a talent. Like, everybody can't just keep at it. Everybody doesn't have a thirst to learn multiple things. And I think that is part of a talent. And so that's really important too, because it's such a narrow thing when we think about it. Oh, is this person, are they singing better, or are they like painting better? But at the same time, just as an outsider, I think that probably just a combination of life experiences and what you were doing, I think that you did have a natural talent for musical theater writing before you went to grad school. Maybe you hadn't been doing it, but I remember one of the first things you did. It was incredible.
Thank you.
I mean, yeah. And it was just like, oh yeah, I did this. And I feel like it didn't really take that long. Did it? I don't know, am I like misremembering? But I feel like this was not like a long process. It was just like, oh, this is this fabulous piece of work. I did this in a couple days or something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you. I think that we all have talent. I think talent is like a booty. Ideally, we all have one.
Oh my
Otherwise,
God.
things would get very complicated. But I think that we all have it. It's just that what we choose to pay a premium for varies. Some people are very talented at, I don't know, physical organization and cleaning. Okay. And that, trust me, I'm appreciating those people who will have that mindset and who are supremely organized. But then there are people who are very talented at playing a sport. Well, we pay a higher premium from one than the other. I think that I do have a unique ability to learn things. My learning curve when it comes to creative endeavors, particularly with music and things like that, the arts, the curve is steeper than most. I do have a level of talent there, but it wasn't activated by go into the practice room and learn your instrument to extraordinary levels of capability. It was, okay, do this. And because I can play well enough instruments, I can create from that perspective. And when you put all of them together to create a work, well, the work is not about the virtuosity of the ability of the player. It's about the virtuosity of the mind. And my ability to showcase that came from what I could do in combining things as opposed to going in one direction. And now I think over the past 10 years or so, there's a greater appreciation for that than there was when we were starting out. I think that when we were starting out, or at least when, we were racing through New York, it was all about you needed to be the best. Otherwise, New York is where all the best of the best come. And that is true. Well, in a way, my version of that was combining not being the best of the best. And we've seen this all for forever. I tell people, I have to appreciate somebody like J-Lo or Jennifer Lopez. Can she dance? Yes. Can she act? Yes. Can she sing? Yes. Does she have smart business acumen? Definitely. But, you know, is she great at any one thing? Would you say that? I wouldn't say that she's a Meryl Streep. I wouldn't say that she's a Rochelle Farrell. I wouldn't say that she's a Cheetah Rivera. But
Hmm.
when you combine all the things that she does, is that extraordinary? Without a doubt.
Hmm.
And to make it in a patriarchal society as a woman of color and have a long career
Hmm.
and a career that is still going. I remember Jennifer Lopez in the 90s
Hmm.
and have a career, you know, to the point where we have to redefine the characteristics of certain roles in
Hmm.
Hollywood based on age and based on identity. Amazing.
Yeah.
So I think that we are beginning to broaden the scope of what we define as talent.
Hmm.
And so I will say, when people say, "Oh, you're talented," I'll say, "Yes, but aren't we all?" But I've worked
Hmm.
hard, but I will say that I've also worked very hard.
Okay.
And you know, there are caveats to that. There's certain things that I have challenges doing because of certain things that come a little bit easier to me. So,
Okay.
you know, I think
Yeah.
we're all talented at something. It's just, you know, do we find it? And does the world recognize its value? Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about this decision when you've written this piece for Teddy, Trenton Educational Dance Institute. You've written this
Oh, yeah.
piece. It's this
Mhm.
beautiful piece. And then you're making this decision to apply for school. And this is like a turning point. This is a change in lifestyle, a change. You're focusing on this one thing.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I don't think that was a like super easy decision. There's something in you. Tell us about this decision making process,
Yeah.
if you
So
remember,
I
so long
oh
ago.
I remember. I've forgotten a lot, but I remember that. I so at this point I'm getting close to 10 years in to New York and into the field, and every year it was a grind. And you know, New York eats you up.
Mm.
And part of it is because there's so many talented people, and people are coming in every day, every year, who are very talented and very driven.
Mm-hmm.
But what the other side of that is, even if that wasn't the case, New York is still a grind just by its very being. And so I was at the point where every year I was wondering if I was going to have a teaching job, teaching arts and ed. Is my program going to get cut? Is there going to be a catastrophe where, okay, people start putting money into the arts? And if people start putting money into the arts, then we don't have jobs.
Hmm.
Was I booking the roles that I necessarily wanted to book, say on Broadway? Not necessarily, no. Was I performing? Well, yes, we all find ways to perform. But is this something that was going to maintain itself? And I needed to know what was next
Mm-hmm.
because this cycle was getting old. And I know a number of people, and I'd said, Kwame had mentioned to me, the gentleman that I was speaking about earlier, he said, I don't want to be whatever age this is, whatever age that was, running around New York with a drum on my back.
Mm-hmm.
Because, just so you know, a djembe is not light. It's a big piece of wood. And walking around New York up and out of the trains and the subways and all types of weather, it takes its toll on your body. It
Mm-hmm.
takes its toll on your hands. And if that's your job, and your job could be gone in an instant, that level of insecurity starts to wear on you after a certain amount of time. And so I had to decide, what else could I do? And what I had been doing for this program, Teddy, that you mentioned, was I was an accompanist, but because I had I write music, I was writing music and creating music for their shows. And because I had a background in dance and I have a background in theater, I was helping to create these shows for the students. And so I had an idea for another show. And one of the people that I worked for and dance companies that I worked for, was Urban Bushwoman, and Jawole Willa Jozala is a mentor of sorts, and who had been very, influential at different points in my career. And so I was touring because, again, I was working in the education system with Teddy. And in between, that was my job. But my career was, I was a musician, I was touring, I was playing gigs, doing recording sessions. So I was on tour back in Florida, and I met with Jawole to discuss an idea for a show that I was thinking of writing. And Jawole mentioned, Njawle, who is also professor emeritus at Florida State University, asked me if I thought about going back to school. And I told her I got out of school the last time on a wing and a prayer. So it never crossed my mind to get another degree. But this was coinciding with the downturn in the economy. So again, those crises that come to New York and come to, the world to a degree, and influence whether there are opportunities for the arts. This was beginning to settle in. This is the beginning of the Obama years. So Obama was inheriting that economy, and that was on the downswing. And so things were basically going to get harder before they got easier. My program, Teddy, was having a hard time finding funding to continue every year. And so I made the decision to apply to see if I could get into this musical theater writing program at NYU, at Tisch, which was the only one of its kind. And it felt like it was something that I had a unique talent for, because it combined a lot of different abilities into one thing. And so I didn't know if I was going to get in. I definitely didn't know how I was going to pay for it, because NYU is known as being one of the most expensive schools in the free world. And sure enough, I got in. They gave me a fellowship. And so that began the pivoting of my career. But what this meant is that I would be giving up, to a degree, my career as a performer, if I were to see this through into a career. And that's what I had to decide. And I decided that, well, why not? And then now I don't perform much at all in the same way that I did prior. And do I miss it? Every now and then, but not as much as I thought that I would, because my mind is still stimulating. Mind is still stimulated.
Okay.
And so my career made that pivot. And that was a choice. Other career things that have happened, they just kind of happened, but that was a clear choice. And it's kind of like the choice to leave New York, if you will. Like, you made a choice to leave New York, and you had to I imagine that you had to think about it and then decide, yes, I'm going to do this. And things go the way they go.
Yeah, I'm more of a, like, the intuition says go. And so I'm like, wow, if it's strong enough, which it was for Austria, it was just like, okay, it's time to move. And I'm like, okay, it's time to move. And that's that.
So it's not dissimilar. It's not dissimilar for me. I just decided, my gut is telling me, take this opportunity and see where it goes. I can always, backtrack or come back or whatever.
Yeah.
But things went the way that they did. Life went the way that it did, and I wouldn't change it.
Yeah. It's interesting because you were saying that the next things just happened. And, a lot has just happened. I don't know. Did you meet James in grad school?
Yes.
You guys met? So you meet your fellow writing partner. You are partner with Clever Agency. Oh my gosh. Clever looks so interesting, and all I know that it is a communications agency. Okay, but first, I would love to just chat a little bit about your partnership and the writing that you all are doing.
So here's the thing about James. We met in grad school, but we could have met at any of a number of other points. At that dance studio where we met each other, actually, because James's partner at the time was in and out of that studio teaching.
Really?
And a dancer. Yeah. So we know a lot of the same people from that world and the theater world. James is a career actor in a number of ways, but James and I are very similar. And so we kind of clicked in grad school. We're the same age. We had a similar mentality. We are similarly New York grizzled. So a little bit jaded, a little bit still ambitious, but a little bit jaded and cynical. So we both had all these traits, but also we are both military brats. So we both grew up in different places, moving every 3 or 4 years. Our parents, we both lived in some of the same places. And we both struck out for New York to perform. And so when we met, we got on because there's a certain language that children whose parents are in the military kind of have. We kind of have a interesting disposition. We can adapt quickly. We have this collection of random information in our heads that we pick up pick up from moving around a lot. And the only different, well, the primary difference is that, well, James is white and I'm African American. And that wasn't as much of a deal for us, but we both could see how the world views us differently. And that has worked its way into the work that we create.
Okay.
And finally, we both wanted to create similar type of work that has a social consciousness, but a work that is also fun and engaging and enjoyable. And so, yeah, we struck a creative friendship and a creative collaborative relationship at Tisch. And we at NYU in this program, 2 people or 3 people come together to create a thesis project, which is a show. And that's basically your thesis. Your thesis is you write a full-length show. And we wrote our full-length show together. And because, as I often say, we disagree well, which is usually the thing that causes most partnerships to collapse. We can disagree well most of the time. So that allowed us to work through areas where we don't, see eye to eye on some aspect of the project. And we continue to move on. He's good at things that I'm not good at, and I'm good at things that he's not good at. And so it works. We're complementary in that way. And so we've continued to write shows, and it's been, there have been ups and downs, because writing shows, musical theater is very collaborative. You need a team of people. It takes a lot of people to create a show. And it also requires a fair amount of money as well. And so we spend more time chasing money than actually writing the shows.
Oh my goodness.
But things dry up for a while, and then all of a sudden things ramp up. So with COVID, we had some things in development that had to take a pause. And during that time, I leaned deeper into education. James leaned deeper into acting, continuing to act. And he's actually in a show right now, a production of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, playing the Michael Caine part, I believe, from the movies. So yeah, but then things opened up, and we had written these shows. We had this collection of shows. And so now theaters are looking at them, and as well as commissioning us to write more.
Nice.
So we have a commissioned project with The Lamplighters by Georges, which is a Gilbert and Sullivan inspired operetta that's centering on a highly fictionalized episode or period of time for the Chevalier de Saint-Georges, who is a French composer of African descent, who is now finally being recognized. And then we have Bottle Shock, which we wrote 10 years ago, which is a show about wine. It's a show about wine. Who doesn't like wine? So I could tell which one you prefer.
Listen, I'm open to all things.
No judgment, but
I'm open. Get it? I'm sorry. Never mind. Sorry.
I see what you did there. So
thank you.
So we're very fortunate to have these exciting things, and we're having fun. I mean, we really enjoy being in the studio and working with other performers, and we're realizing that there are more performers who are multi-hyphenates like ourselves than has previously been expected. And now we're having our day, and it's exciting.
Yeah, it is. I'm excited for y'all. Definitely. Tell us about Clever. It looks fabulous. Y'all are always traveling and doing something amazing.
Oh, thank you. Clever is interesting. In between all of these endeavors that we set out to do, things kind of happen, and you fall into things, or endeavors kind of come together, particularly if you have an entrepreneurial vigor. And I think that if you're a professional artist, then you are most certainly an entrepreneur, because your business is yourself. And so at a time in New York when things were becoming challenging for artists, a series of interesting events happened. Malondo Jones had moved to England, and he's a visual artist. He's a graduate of SVA, and he had been working for SVA and found himself with the opportunity to go to London. And so he went to London for a while, and then came back before he had planned to. And we were all in the throes of figuring out what was next in our life. I was coming out of grad school, and another gentleman, Brooke Stevenson, who's passed on, was a writer who was working through writer's block. And James, and there were other writers and creative-minded people. And we all came together because we had some level of savvy and say, okay, well, one of the things that artists don't have is ways to present themselves to the world outside of the product, their art, because they spend so much time working on their craft that where do they have time to think about how to let the world know that they exist? And it started with just documenting our lifestyle and the things that we did. We love to travel and the things that we were doing. And we were all kind of burgeoning photographers, as everybody was in Brooklyn during the neo soul years. Everybody had their own little DSLR and like, I'm a photographer. What does this button do? But we used our abilities to document the interesting things that were going on in our world, and to document the works that other people were doing. That became the benchmark of what would become the Clever Agency. And I have to acknowledge that the Clever Agency was the brainchild of Malondo Jones, but we all had spent time sitting on Brooke's sofa watching the Mastermind videos and thinking of ways, reading The Artist Way, and thinking of ways to coalesce our collection of abilities into something that was tangible. And it would turn out to be the Clever Agency. So when people ask, well, what is the Clever Agency? Well, it's a content creation studio, but we've had to arrive at that coming from, well, what do you need? What does the Clever Agency do? Well, what do you need? Well, we need this. Okay, so we do that. So we've made music videos, we've done releases, we've done graphic design, we've done created websites, we've worked with non-for-profits, 501c3s for marketing materials. So we do a lot of things, but ideally we would fall under marketing, but marketing is, in our mind, basically finding a means of communication between the creator or the creative and their audience or target demographic.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is beautiful. This is beautiful. And yeah, I'm proud to have known you for so long and to be able to hear this story. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you.
It's
Thank
so
you.
beautiful.
Life.
Listen, where can we find out more about you, Clever? Give us all the handles, Clever, Burwell, and Sasser.
So you can look at burwellandsasser.com for the things that James and I are doing. You can also look at thecleveragency.com, and you can see all of Clever's endeavors. And you can access all of these through my personal website, which is charlesvincentburwell.com. There are hyperlinks to all of these things, and you can see some of the things that we're doing. I'm on Instagram at @thelife_of_Vince. And I'm not the most active documenter or poster, but my stories, you can usually see what's going on in our stories. And you can also find through my website a number of other artists who are doing amazing things.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And yeah, we will be in touch.
Definitely. We have to stay in touch a little bit more because I want to hear more about what you're doing. I see your name everywhere. So I'm excited.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
You too.
The Courageous Voice podcast is a collaboration between Connect.Faith and me, Shanda Rule. Music is by Ike Sturm and production by Jess Burchett. Thanks for listening.